Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching Couples Therapy on Showtime. Let's watch.
He left home at 15. He left for an older woman because this college-aged woman bed-bound him for a couple of days. His family didn't know where he was. And it was like his sexual awakening / like that was it. Childhood was over. Really never went home. This was the first person that ever said to him, "You're great at something. You're great at this."
Okay, so that's interesting. Who knows, but if I was to develop some hypotheses based on what we've already seen from this couple, I would say there's a possible hypothesis here that his family life wasn't very good and that he was being abused or neglected or there was conflict or chaos in the family. I don't know. There's just a lot of different options there. The reason why I hypothesize that is because the way he presents and also with a lot of attachment insecurity, seemingly, and also that he left home at the age of 15. Now, it's possible to leave home at 15 even though your family life is good if you have a charismatic enough person to pull you away, which it sounds like this older woman might have been. But I wouldn't be surprised if his childhood didn't have some difficulty. Then the other hypothesis we have here, and it sounds like Annie, the wife, also has this hypothesis that it was the very first time for Mao that he was able to feel like he was good at something. And it might have even been one of the first times in his life when he actually felt like he was attachment secure with someone. This is very common for people with attachment insecurity, lack of attunement, lack of attention, lack of love, lack of stability growing up. When they get involved in a romantic sexual relationship when they are in their teen years or maybe even younger, for the very first time, they feel safe. They feel heard. They feel understood. They feel like they matter to someone else. And depending on the circumstances of that relationship, it can potentially lock in a model of what closeness is supposed to be like. And for some people, it's a good relationship where it's mutual and it's non-exploitative and there's no abuse going on. And then that locks in a expectation or a working model of yourself and other people and of relationships that if you seek relationships outside the family that are mutually beneficial, you can actually get your attachment needs met, attachment needs that never were met when you were growing up. The other possibility, though, is that the relationship in your teen years, as you're running away from your family and trying to get attachment security, has some problems with it. And from the sound of it, it sounded like there were at least a couple problems there. One for Mao. One is that it was an older woman, which I don't know how much older, but 15-year-old with an older person, that's absolutely going to be exploitative. The 15-year-old doesn't know how to navigate the world or sexual relationships or romantic relationships and is probably desperate, looking for a situation that will feel better for them than the one that they're coming from. And so likelihood of high control, likelihood of exploitation, likelihood of abuse, essentially, even if it's quote-unquote consensual. It's easier for us culturally to understand this when we're looking at a woman or a girl who was a teenager at the age of 15 who was with a 30-year-old man. It's much easier for us because it's more culturally discussed that that arrangement is exploitative of the 15-year-old. Almost no one with a right mind will say that that is not an exploitative. Everyone in their right mind, double negatives, everyone in their right mind would say a 15-year-old girl with a 30-year-old man is automatically exploitative and automatically something that we want to avoid. We don't need to investigate the relationship. That age difference, given the age of the younger person, is potentially illegal, but also not helpful to the 15-year-old. But somehow when it comes to 15-year-old boys or boys of any age, we have a harder time comprehending that, even though we might intellectually understand it. And the key is that for me, I have heard many stories, including Umberto, who is my co-host on the audio podcast, about boys being exploited by older people, women included, and girls, older girls, and how that can absolutely have all the same effects that we associate with the exploitation sexually and romantically of younger females. So he was 15, being exploited by an older person, and he was being praised for his sexual ability and he's away from his family, and there's an intense relationship there, sexually being tied up. Who knows if that's involved in some of this issue? I wouldn't be surprised. Possibly he, again, this is just an hypothesis, in that moment felt a rush of adrenaline and euphoria and togetherness and oxytocin and dopamine and everything, a feeling that he had never felt before. And ever since, he has been pursuing that experience again, because we've heard complaints from Annie and from him that he needs a lot of sexual activity. He needs a lot of sexual stimulation, and his wife can't provide all of that. And that's a big part of their tension. But my hypothesis is that he's not actually chasing sexual gratification. He is chasing that high that he felt when he was 15, and he was not only having sex, but he also felt heard and understood and taken care of, and he felt someone cuddling with him, making him feel like he was worth it, making him feel like he was loved, paying attention to him. And sometimes when people pursue this, you can call it, sometimes people call it sex addiction, sometimes love addiction. Sometimes it's just a defense that people will engage in on their recovery from the traumas that they went through. What I would imagine, or the hypothesis that I would follow with him, is I would be trying to help him to open up his idea of getting his needs met, and really identifying the various needs that he might be funneling all into sexual activity. A lot of men do this because men are only allowed to express their sexuality when it comes to connection with others. Men are allowed culturally to cry or cuddle or express vulnerability or express even need. Even the expression of "I need you," I depend on you, that is a no-no for men. And so it's okay for men to want sex, and so men will funnel hundreds of needs into one particular activity, and then people complain about men being over-sexualized. But we as a society did that to the men in the first place. I don't know if that's a viable hypothesis for him, but let's continue watching.
Child, but that experience, that foundational experience, then informs so much that we have thought about.
Okay, I need to hear more, just to know how to understand this piece of history.
Okay.
So that's good. The therapist is highlighting the fact that, whoa, that wasn't just a minor detail that you laid down. That was a humongous detail. I'm going to need more information about that one, because Annie just says this casual thing like, well, he was essentially abducted by an older woman and tied up and ran away from home at the age of 15. Seems like there's some importance to that event or the series of events to what the two of you are talking about as a couple. So she's highlighting that, and it's good.
Okay, I need to hear more, just to know how to understand this piece of history.
Okay.
How old were you when your parents separated finally?
I think probably like 11 or 12.
And who did you go with?
My mother. I don't think she really took care of us. I mean, we were there, and so we were safe because she was not violent the way my dad was.
Mm-hmm. So you were safe physically.
Okay, a little bit more detail that the father was violent and mother was there, but maybe not emotionally there. So we're talking about a lifetime of, through his childhood, of neglect and violence and trauma and abuse, which often results in the kinds of things that Mao has presented. A difficulty trusting others, a difficulty even conceptualizing and communicating his own needs. I don't know if that's true, but from what we've seen thus far, it seems like that's a viable assessment of him. Frustration, frequent frustration. Essentially what happens is when we're young, we're being frustrated with our relationships. We're constantly from 0 to 20, we're feeling like we're being let down, we're being disappointed, we're being treated like we don't matter, and we're angry, we're hurt, we're scared, we're upset. All those feelings just get transferred or displaced onto our spouses when we become adults, or our friends, or our work, or our bosses, or people we work with, and then our relationships become really difficult for us. even though our relationship as an adult might actually be okay, it might be going relatively well, but we'll displace all or transfer all those feelings onto our spouse, our distrust of them, our feeling of abandonment onto them, our feeling that we're being disappointed, that our spouses are treating us wrong. And maybe they're slightly treating us wrong, but it's times 10 because of this unresolved pain and attachment injury that we incurred growing up.
Or say physically.
What kind of mother was she?
I mean, I'm a big fan of my mother's. My mother is, she's like incredibly warm and sweet and vain and thoughtless.
Okay, so he's saying that his mom is warm and sweet, but also vain and thoughtless. So possible avoidant attachment for the mom, possible narcissism with the mom, hard to say. These kinds of relational traumas get passed down. I'm guessing that his mom had troubles. I'm guessing his dad had troubles when they were children, and things just get passed down through the generation.
I mean, to this day, I think if you were to ask any of my siblings, we'd all agree that we're still waiting for her to take us to the pool 35 years ago. I mean, she never once successfully accomplished we're going to do a thing. Like, it never happened.
Okay, so this happens all the time in therapy, what I'm about to tell you. I don't know if this is true for Mao, but the couple or the individual or the family, they'll come into my office and there will be these surface or immediate complaints that people will have. And Mao has done this. Mao has, from the beginning, he's been saying, my wife is disappointing. She doesn't deliver. She doesn't show up. She doesn't give me what I need. She's always letting me down, that kind of vibe. And once I investigate and I'm thinking, what's going on here? It seems like something else is going on here. Then we find out that he, from the day he was born until he moved out at the age of 15, was being neglected by his mom. He said, I don't know the exact thing he said, but me and my siblings were still waiting for our mom to take us to the pool and to pay attention to us and, give us meet our needs. And it's and usually that's what we'll attach to is like, I always wanted my mom to take me to the pool. Well, more fundamentally and much deeper is this desire for our parents to know us and to understand us and be there for us and be safe and to be attuned and to notice our feelings and to say, oh, you must be really hurt, or, oh, I see that you're sad, or, oh, I see that you're happy, or, oh, I'm so proud of you. These kinds of feelings really fill a child with this notion that they matter and that they can trust other people and they meet the child's needs. So for him, his whole life, he was being disappointed, left behind, not being paid attention to, and neglected. And lo and behold, what is the theme of his complaint about his wife? The exact same. So is the wife somewhat disappointing him? Perhaps, but again, probably times 10 given his early childhood experience. So then what do we do? Well, the first thing we have to do, so there's two avenues that I'll take depending on the length of therapy. If I feel like Mao is coming into me just for a few sessions, I don't necessarily have time to get him on board with what I just said. So I might actually just spend a lot of time asking him about his childhood and hope that he consciously or unconsciously makes that connection that he is displacing onto his wife and or healing a little bit, or maybe get the ball rolling on the healing for the traumas that he went through such that he doesn't need to displace onto his wife anymore. But if I have more longer term clients, which is usually the case, then I will try to have him understand my conceptualization. We'll explore it together. Maybe I'm wrong, but if I'm right, or at least he finds it to be at least kind of accurate, then we can develop a narrative as to what the effect of his childhood had on him. Now, people can be real defensive about that for various reasons, particularly men, because men don't want to seem weak. But people, regardless of gender, people have a hard time with this, particularly when they've been abused significantly. They really, really resist this notion that they are exaggerating their reaction to their spouse, because that's essentially what I'd be asking my client to accept, that okay, a little bit of your disappointment in your wife is justified, but it is probably exacerbated or exaggerated by the fact that you were very, very neglected and disappointed and let down throughout your childhood, which is much more fundamental and much more harming to one's personality. So yes, you're valid in your complaints for your wife, but the intensity of that is exaggerated. And it doesn't mean that we just let your wife off the hook, but it does mean that we need to help you recover. So when I present that idea, clients, given their development regarding their recovery, the amount of security they have in their relationship with me, the amount of experience they have in exploring these kinds of things, the amount of self-esteem they have, because you have to have self-esteem to be able to accept that idea of, wait, so I'm exaggerating, I'm intensifying my reaction to my spouse based on my past, which means that right now I'm not exactly right in the way that I'm thinking. I feel like my spouse is completely letting me down. Like on a scale from 1 to 10, it's an 8. But my therapist is telling me it's more like a 3, and I'm making it 8 based on my past. You have to have a lot of self-esteem, or at least a lot of security in a relationship, to be able to withstand that kind of, it's basically criticism. You're saying, my feelings are wrong, right? And if you've been rejected and abused, then just me doing that, me introducing that idea can actually trigger someone. So I actually have to gauge the personality and the ego strength of the clients before I even hint that I have that idea. Because for some clients, and I've ran into this, I've stepped on this landmine before with certain personality disorders, is I will drop that hint or that possibility. I'd never say like, this is what's happening, because I don't know. I'd have to get feedback from the client. I'll step in that landmine and they either blow out of therapy because they're completely insulted by me, even though, I'm trying to help and I think that I'm kind of right. So I don't think I've done anything wrong, but I have done something wrong because I didn't gauge the self-esteem or the ego strength, or whether or not they have a personality disorder that is susceptible to criticism. And so what I tell my trainees is assume all your clients have a personality disorder until they prove otherwise. Because, not that you're just labeling everyone with a personality disorder, but so many times with me and my trainees, you just proceed into therapy normally. You step on a landmine of a particular personality disorder. Personality disorders, one very rough way of thinking about them is that it results in very, very significant distortions of what's happening. People become extremely distorted in their perceptions. It's not delusional like schizophrenia or something. It's just based on their experience. For some people, they were criticized so unfairly and rejected so often as a child that they learned when there's a criticism, you got to fight back or else you're going to be left behind. And or they believe that they're worthless, and any kind of criticism just is poking a wound for them. But anyway, so that's what I'd be thinking with him, and it's just interesting that he is saying this right now, because if I was a therapist, I'd be like, "Haha, we've arrived! Finally, the trauma has been revealed." Let's see what she says.
It wasn't about the relationship.
No, was it around the same time?
It was around the same time. Yeah.
So what was going on at home around then?
I think it was just sort of more of the same. It was like our house was unsupervised. When I disappeared, I hooked up with this girl and I just went with her, and it never dawned on me to communicate with anybody. I never had before.
About this love affair?
No.
About being not coming home for dinner and then not coming home.
Interesting. So it's another piece of evidence of how neglecting the mother was. And you'll see this in kids that are neglected emotionally and physically. They just have this, they realize that no one cares about their whereabouts, and they won't report in. And that will get translated into their adult life, that they won't tell you if you're a spouse of someone with these kinds of avoidant attachments. They just won't even think to contact their loved ones when important events are happening. They live very much in their own mind because they were left to their own devices, and there was no, in fact, what happened when they're younger, I don't know if this is true for him, I wouldn't be surprised, that there's a natural impulse when you're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, when something's happening, is to reach out, is to alert. your parents or your family or people that are close to you, your caregivers. And when things are going well, there's attunement and there's reaction to that, and it locks in this neuronal pattern of when I have something past a certain threshold, I alert other people to what's going on, if it's happiness or sadness or fear. But you do that enough times as a child and nothing happens, or you're abused as a result, then you just turn it off. And neuronally, the adult actually, they don't even make a choice. It's not like the adult avoidant person says, you know what, I feel like I should contact my spouse, but I'm not going to because I don't trust other people. It just doesn't occur to them. It's like a blind spot in their personality. And they'll be flabbergasted when other people are upset at them because it just doesn't occur to them because they had to turn off that aspect of their personality and their impulse when they were young. Otherwise, bad things would have happened.
My kid's doing that.
I don't know.
It's like unthinkable.
When I did show back up, my younger brother, Rich, he was like, where have you been? And I'm like, I'm out the door as with her. He's like, oh, okay. That was it. That was the extent of the conversation of
Right, no parent questioning, no older brother, nobody noticing.
I don't know if my mother is aware I wasn't there.
Yeah.
I mean, she may not have known.
So we're hearing some surface level things of he's saying, yeah, I don't even know if my mom noticed I was gone. And you're thinking, well, you're 15. That's pretty bad, but it's maybe not that bad. But usually you have to extrapolate from there, not only to just not noticing that he's there, but also not noticing that he exists, not noticing his emotions. And then you write the narrative back to when he was born, that in all likelihood, the mom, and if the dad's being abusive, and the mom is being neglectful, that from the day he was born, he wasn't noticed. And so you imagine you're 18 months old and you're not being noticed. Like that is going to have an effect on your development personality-wise.
Exciting. Come on. I mean, we can't joke far.
Ulma, I appreciate that. It isn't upsetting to me. Having kids of my own.
Okay, so I kind of interrupted that a little bit, but the therapist, I think, had a good impulse. She's saying, "Wow, that's upsetting. You're joking, but let's be real. Let's actually rewatch that because I think that's an important intervention." But while we watch it, the thing that I would have done differently, given the way that he is I would have I would have assumed that any kind of empathy or sympathy or highlighting of what his difficulties was, I would assume that he would resist it because of his neglect. He cannot be vulnerable to other people, and to accept other people's empathy is to be vulnerable, which is a big no-no given his past. So I wouldn't be, I wouldn't do it in that tone. What I would have said was something along the lines of, Mao, I'm so sorry that you went through that. That sounds awful. Now, he's going to resist it, but there's nothing he has to respond to. He could just blow past it. He could ignore everything that I'm saying. Instead, so I'm expecting the resistance, but I'm also not creating an opportunity for more resistance. What she's doing right now is something along those lines. I think that's the message she's trying to get across, but she's also mildly criticizing him, which also illuminates possible countertransference that is not helpful. But I don't know. I'd have to talk with her. But she's saying, "Come on, you're making a joke about this. This is a big deal." And I think that it ramps up the tension too far, and then he's really going to resist it, But anyway, maybe she's on a campaign. But let's rewind that and watch that bit.
Was there?
Yeah.
I mean, she may not have known.
That's upsetting. Come on. I mean, we can't joke far.
Ulma, I appreciate that. It isn't upsetting to me. Having kids of my own, I would be very upset.
I'm just thinking, you would be upset as a parent, but just thinking about the kid.
Yeah,
No one
but
worrying where you are at 15, that's upsetting, or before.
Right, that's another way, and I like the way she's going with it, and it seems to be working. He's not resisting. There seems to be something happening inside of him. You kind of see it, where he's like, "Oh, okay, I appreciate it. That's nice, but it's fine." And you'll hear that particularly from avoidant people. They'll just be like, everything's fine. They're not saying that because they're consciously trying to avoid. They actually don't feel bad about it because they're not in connection with their emotions. There is a ton of pain and fear going on underneath, but they cut themselves off from that years ago, maybe when they were 2 years old. So and you'll hear that from a lot of avoidant people. They'll say, yeah, my childhood was pretty good. And then you hear about their childhood and you're like, that doesn't sound very good. But anyway, one of the things that she's doing is a little self-disclosure, which is what I would do as well. I would say something like, well, to you're saying everything's fine. But I just have to say, from my standpoint, where I'm sitting, hearing that story, if I went through what you went through, I would be so sad and so angry and so hurt and so scared. And I'm just imagining, given what you're telling me, that this didn't just begin when you were 15. This goes back to when you were born. And I know you're telling me that everything's fine, and I accept that. So in my mind, I'm like, I don't really accept it, but I have to on the surface because I don't want to get into a power struggle with him. So I say, I get it. I hear you that you're saying, but I'm just saying, for me, I would be devastated. I would be so scared and so hurt. I mean, life has its own fear and hurt anyway, but to think about what you went through, I just have to say, I mean, I'm feeling it right now. So that's the self-disclosure part of it. And I would be, I wouldn't be lying. I would be, feeling those feelings. And that happens sometimes with avoidant people, is they will actually, through projective identification, make you feel their feelings. And if you're not differentiated enough, you won't be able to navigate through those feelings, and you might actually create conflict with that person where you're yelling at them and saying, you're a robot, when instead of going, oh, I'm being injected with their feelings, and wow, they must feel really bad often, is sort of the compassionate view.
Setting, and that's non-negotiable.
Okay. I don't have a sense that things were terrible. I mean, I can understand that I didn't have sort of a typical or it wasn't a path that would genuinely lead to success. Okay,
so again, we're getting into a power struggle here of resistance, which you do not want to meet head on. You don't want to say, but. You want to say yes and. So the yes and is, yeah, I hear you. I would agree. So you're saying that there were a lot of good things, and you're resilient. You got through it, and your mom was sweet and loving, it sounds like, but she's also vain and didn't, pay attention to you. But there were good things in your childhood. I acknowledge that. And when I hear your story and I imagine the full nature of your story, it pains me to hear. I am so sorry that you went through that. I wish I could go back in time in a time machine and talk to young Mao when he was 2 or 5 or 15 and tell him that he deserved better than that. So I would say something like that. Now, why would I be doing this? And this is very important to you therapists out there. We don't just try to blast clients because we want to win or convince them of things. We have a goal in mind. And my goal with that would be to try to convince him of this idea that he was neglected, and he's amplifying he's displacing and transferring it onto his wife. With that knowledge comes power over his reactivity to his wife, comes differentiation. Also comes a theme of therapy or a goal in therapy so that he can pursue recovering from the neglect that he went through. Those two things I'd be hoping for I'm always looking for those two things, is self-awareness and healing through corrective experiences. And if he's on board with both of those things, then he's much more likely to move more rapidly through therapy. But he has to admit that that's the problem, or at least as I'm throwing it out there tentatively, he has to say, you know what, that's right, or modify it somehow. So I wouldn't just be trying to convince him of something. I'd be trying to get him on board for his own benefit, for some larger goal that I have in mind for him that he hasn't identified yet, that I'd be hoping that he would identify.
He says, we're still waiting for her to take us to the pool 35 years ago.
He's illustrating her incompetence, but if we just shift our attention, there's the child still waiting 35 years later for their mother, who they are in love with, who's right over there, and doesn't...
Oh my God, that is the birthday thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the birthday thing.
Right, exactly. So I think this is the supervisor. They have some weird label for it on the show. I think, from my memory, they're trying to avoid calling this actual therapy because of maybe ethical reasons. But this emulates at the very least a supervisee, or a consultee relationship. People will hire me and consult about their cases. Either they want me to supervise their relationship, where I'm basically in charge of their practice and I am in charge of making sure that they're doing everything ethically and responsibly. I have to look at their notes. I have to listen to audio tapes or video of their sessions. Or a consultant, which is not a supervisor relationship. It's more you're just asking for someone to give you advice about your work with your clients. But through their conversation, the therapist has made this connection of, oh, wow, yeah, he was disappointed from his mom, and he transferred that onto his wife, and wow, that's the birthday situation right there. Because I'm guessing the therapist, like us, the viewers, looked at that situation between the two of them, and we were confused as to why Mao was disappointed in his wife, because it didn't seem like the wife had drastically or even slightly really disappointed him. But because of his past, he transferred that onto his wife.
Of it, right? Right, still waiting. So a foundational strand of his identity is, I do it alone, no one helps me.
Yeah.
No one believes in me, but I will succeed, doing it my way.
Right, which is avoidant attachment. All the while, underneath is a massive ocean of emotion waiting to be expressed. So they have that duality. The avoidant person is, I'm independent, I don't need other people, I do things on my own, I don't really have emotions, I'm strong. But this, yin-yang situation on the other side of the coin is, I'm weak, no one loves me, I'm desperate. This is why I always say that underneath every avoidant person is a preoccupied person. And this is why I will also say that underneath every narcissistic person is a borderline person. And that's an oversimplification, but the key message that I'm trying to get out there, and that I've learned in my travels with my clients, is that don't believe the hype when it comes to the avoidant personality, the avoidant person, the avoidant attachment person, and their mission to convince themselves and other people that they are robots and they're strong and they don't have emotions, because that is like the opposite of the truth.
Right, which is what he does with her.
Yes. And this is one of those, I saved my life because I met that challenge. Don't mess with my system.
Okay.
All right, I don't know if you heard that, but Annie said, we've never gotten that far before. I think, meaning, we didn't see the whole session, I think meaning we've never made that connection, or we've never even gone back to that past of his neglect that he's been through. So what does that mean? Well, if I was to just take a guess, the two of them have been in couples therapy before, and either the therapy didn't last long enough, or the therapist wasn't oriented this way to actually investigate that, or Mao wasn't ready to actually talk about that, which can be true sometimes, or he tends to produce this countertransference in all the therapists that causes the therapist to dislike him and to get into power struggles with him and to not pursue compassionate conceptualizations of what he went through. All right, so that's a good sign. Reaching out, hand shaking. That means that he probably trusts her and likes her, and the therapist has done a lot to gain his trust and his handshake. That's a wonderful sign. And I get questions sometimes about, is it okay to hug your therapist, or it's unethical to hug your therapist? No, it's not. We just saw an example of that very common scenario. Now, usually I like to have the same physical contact with each client. I always wait. I never initiate. It's like if they initiate it, it's fine. But in that situation, this is just, and that was fine. That was totally fine. But my policy is parity for everyone. So he reaches out to shake her hand. She does that. And then I would have shook her hand as well. If I felt the need to hug, I would have hugged Annie, and then I would say, hey, Mao, she gets a hug, you get a hug. And then I would hug. So I that's usually just my thing. And it's totally fine. Now, generally speaking, I don't hug or even handshake my clients. It just, over time, I've just settled into a place where I don't really initiate that, and my clients don't initiate it either very often. But when they do, it's totally fine. There's a way to hug someone that doesn't, the ethical considerations are, you don't want to confuse the client. Some clients are more prone to this sort of confusion, where if you do hug them, they think that they're your friend or possible romantic interests and this kind of thing. So sometimes with some clients, you don't want to engage in that kind of goodbye because you could confuse clients. Or you could initiate something where a client feels like they have to and they don't want to, and they feel like they're being invaded, and then it harms the relationship. Those are just some of the considerations. So usually what I will recommend to my trainees is, if they initiate, then obviously they're consenting to it. So you can respond if you want to. And that's the other key, is like, as a therapist, you don't have to touch any of your clients if you don't want to. So it's totally fine to just be like, oh, sorry, I'm sorry, I don't shake my clients' hands for various ethical reasons or practice reasons. You might want to explain that at the beginning of therapy so that you don't have a situation where the client thinks they can and then they're rejected in the moment. But anyway, yeah. So for those of you out there who asked that question, that was a wonderful example of what it can look like to have a hug with your therapist and have things go well. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Tune in next time when we continue watching the show, and everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.